I hope you're doing well. I hope you're growing. I hope you're moving forward in the Lord. We're going to continue our discussion on the seal trends. I've covered them in a broad overview before. I wanted to break down each individual seal trend, the first four specifically, because the four horsemen of the apocalypse is a major area of weakness and understanding that a lot of Christians today just can't seem to get it right, and there's really only one way these things can go. Last time we talked about the white horse. We discussed how the rider could only be Antichrist, considering his worldly Stephanos crown, not the diadem like Christ is wearing, basically showing that he is seen by the world as a winner, but he is not actual royalty as far as God is concerned. Otherwise, he'd be wearing a royal crown like Christ is pictured many times in Revelation and elsewhere as having upon his return. The other thing we made mention of is the fact that the bow itself is a very ignoble weapon. It's very effective, but it's considered it's the same thing as saying you're unwilling to face your enemy, right? So it is viewed in antiquity as a coward's weapon. It is viewed as a weapon of intrigue. Essentially, it's sneaky. It's seen as subversive, and it's not seen as something that is brought to the battlefield honorably, but only by those who are dishonorable and unwilling to play fair, essentially. So we've got this white horse showing victory and dominance. We've got this crown showing victory and dominance. And then we've got this weapon of subterfuge and essentially deception. And that's the picture. And we went over it real briefly, but I'll just cover it real quick. Essentially, the first half of the tribulation is marked out by a few major trends, some godly, divine, and some satanic. In this case, the rise of Antichrist is accompanied by two major world wars against Daniel 11 calls him a king of the south, but he is essentially the antagonist for Antichrist so as to give him cover while he goes on his victory tour, if you will, taking out the king of the south and subsuming the lands of the south, the southern portion of the original Roman Empire, into that northern 10 territories, Europe as we understand it now, and thus completing his entire rebuilding of Rome. And therefore, once he actually conquers these nations, he takes his seat in the temple. The next horse, the red horse, it's something else. I'll read you a little snippet from ichthus.com about the red horse, and we'll discuss why this all makes very good, reasonable sense and what to look out for, and how the background has already been laid for these particular series of instances related to this particular horse to occur, and you guys will see what I mean here in just a second. Revelation 6:3-4, and when he, the Lamb, opened the second seal, I heard the second living creature, one of the cherubs, saying, "Come and see." And I looked, and behold, another one, a red horse, came out, and it was given to him who was sitting upon it to take away peace, in other words, to create civil discord, and to bring it about that they, the people of the earth, might slay one another. So a large sword was given to him. The red horse symbolizes the trend of civil discord, civil strife, social upheaval, the breakdown of law and order, the evaporation of civility, an increase in crime, political persecutions, revolutions, and the like. This second tribulational trend is both a direct and indirect result, of the devil's activities spearheaded through his Antichrist. For Satan will be actively involved in the subversion of law and order and of civil peace, as indeed he always has been, in order to corrupt and undermine these sources of inherent resistance to Antichrist and his bid for world power and control. So he needs the nations to crumble, in other words. The removal of the Holy Spirit restraint, symbolized in the opening of this second seal, coupled with the unprecedented intensity of satanic activity in the tribulation, will serve to accelerate these effects beyond anything now imaginable in so short a time. At that time, moreover, the universal breakdown of social harmony and social institutions will tend to have a cascade effect, with each societal devolution tending to reinforce and further accelerate social degeneration worldwide. So it will be a cascade effect. The Spirit's restraint on such things at this present time, to be removed with the opening of the second seal, is well known. See, for example, Galatians 5:17-26. As the color of blood, red is the natural choice, or a natural choice, to symbolize the horseman who represents violent internal strife. For example, the unquestionably bloody slaughter with which, and the sword, whereby it is accomplished in verse 4. For as the history of the world amply attests, foreign conquest is often less bloody than violence which accompanies internal revolution. It must be emphasized here, moreover, that the red horse is not war in the sense of conflict between two separate nations, which is covered in full by the first seal, the white horse, but represents instead the gory violence of internecine conflict. As it was in the case of the trend towards military conquest represented by the first seal, the white horse, revolution and civil strife have also always been with us. However, it is the unparalleled intensity of the trend which is being communicated here, an intensity which, once again, proceeds from the removal of divine restraint and the intensified efforts of the devil. The resultant hardening of the world's population as wickedness increases and love grows cold, that's Matthew 24:12-13, will provide one of the tribulation's most disturbing and horrible trends, as human behavior, never particularly uplifting when seen from the scriptural point of view, is prophesied to take a dramatic turn for the worse. A factor which will both be a result and a contributory factor, a contributory effect of this trend towards social breakdown. Indeed, a significant part of Antichrist's conquests will be accomplished through just such rebellions. And on the other hand, a significant portion of his power will flow from his reorganization of society and the establishment of a new social system whose only true purpose will be to deepen his hold on his kingdom and make all of his followers all the more dependent upon and beholden to him. Finally, the fact that the second horseman will take peace from the earth indicates that the period immediately preceding the tribulation may be one of relative tranquility, a state of affairs which would only make the extraordinary bitterness of the tribulation itself much more difficult to bear. Now, if you followed this channel for any extended period of time, I've made mention that the Islamic world is seemingly primed for a major confrontation with the West, and it's been building up for quite some time. Not only that, but Western nations in general have become overtly friendly to the idea of trying to incorporate essentially foreigners from these different lands into our own nations. And because of the leftist policies and all the forward progressive nonsense that we deal with within our day, these people are not technically expected to essentially get along. They're not designed. The situations that they're brought in are not designed to integrate anyone into these societies. So what you have is a series of foreign nationals who are establishing essentially a microcosm, or a small version, if you will, of their own nations within these countries. Now, we're already seeing a lot of the nonsense involved there. We're seeing some of the malfeasance with some of our politicians regarding a lot of this illegal immigration, we'll call it. But the reality is, once the king of the South and the king of the North finally do officially go to battle with one another, the chances of there being not only mass riots and revolutions from these foreign populations brought into the West, there's also a very strong likelihood that we're going to see some version of what we're seeing here in the United States. That is a deportation of illegal immigrants, mostly against their will, of course, and we've seen the videos. You guys have seen all the violence and the stupidity and the nonsense from the left side in this country. And I'm not saying the right's any better, but what we have is a situation where not only will these people not go quietly, but they will likely do everything they can to set the place on fire before they leave. And I'm not saying that this is the only source of the strife that is bound to come our way, but it only stands to reason that once these people have been convinced that this is now officially their land and they're being told they need to leave, obviously this is going to cause a mass issue. And if you guys know anything about Islam, there's a few other religions like this, unfortunately, but one of Islam's main tenets is to breed out its enemies. So it would totally make sense that them having one of their major pillars of their enactment of their faith, which is, again, land in a foreign nation, start breeding, act peaceful to the point to where your people are in greater number than those of the natural population, and then you take over. And that's the whole goal. It's to essentially peacefully breed out the local dominant population to the point to where they are no longer dominant and no longer the majority. So the fact that these things are basically being set up, shoved in our face, and a fuse is being lit where it's going to go off underneath us, we should expect these things. But the reality is, we're seeing some of that happen now. We're only going to see an increase until that first seal is removed. Antichrist is allowed to do what he does. And shortly after he starts doing his thing, we are going to see most, if not all, Western nations essentially rip themselves apart from the inside out. The end result will be even more, unfortunately, political and perhaps even, well, I guess you can call it patriotism, but it's a satanic type of patriotism designed to inflame people's pride and arrogance and think that somehow this particular earthly answer that Antichrist is offering is the right one. We all hopefully know that it's not. So what would the answer be otherwise? I don't know. I just know that this is the situation being handed to us, and it totally makes sense for us to pay attention to all the players on the ground so that way once the pieces start moving, we're not surprised. And this is just another one of the ways in which the Spirit is making sure that those of us who actually care about these things is aware. Let me know what you think in the comments. We are just so close to all of this stuff, and to ignore the fact that the groundwork has already been laid, I think, is foolish. So, and I think that's very much exactly what this particular trend is pointing towards. So keep an eye out. Obviously, it hasn't started yet. We haven't seen many of the signs that tribulation has began, and I've mentioned many times over that I fully believe fall 2026 is that time. So keep an eye out, head on a swivel. Obviously, earthly answers are not going to be what will get us through these things, but we are given these bits of information to pay attention to ahead of time, intentionally. So anyway, let me know what you think. Bless you guys. I hope you're doing well. Like, share, comment, subscribe, tell your friends, and let's keep getting ready for this test of tests to come. Talk to you soon.